We all have that wondering. I know certainly when I was pregnant with our daughter, just wondering, who is this person going to be? Who am I going to be as their parent? And that was much more the scary thought for me. What if I'm not, the best parent I can be? What if I'm not worthy of parenting this child?
That was Carolyn Shulman discussing the song Kissing My Son, which was inspired by Psalm 2. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we discuss what songs inspired by the Psalms inspire in my guests. Carolyn knew from the time her father gave her a guitar at age 9 that she wanted to play music for the rest of her life. After a stint practicing law in Houston, Carolyn moved to Denver and recorded her debut album, Grenadine and Kerosene. That album hit number 22 on the folk radio charts. Carolyn's new album, which came out in 2024, Heart on a Wire, was released to fabulous reviews. You can find all her music on her website, carolynshulman.com. That's Carolyn with a Y and Shulman is S-H, and you can find it on all streaming platforms. In today's episode, we discuss relationships between parent and child, ritual, God laughing, the difference between cynical laughter and joyous laughter, songwriting choices, God's voice, praying with your feet, and so much more. Let's start by listening to Kissing My Son.
Smell of new life. Tremble with joy. Kissing my son. Fear in this joy. What if he is? What if he's not? What if I am? What if I'm not?
Love you, kiss you, that's my desire, my mission. That's my desire, my mission. Love you, kiss you. Shake off the ropes. Ropes of convention. Dive deep, dive in. Divine laughter ringing. Drop after drop. It's many years later. Hole in the rock. Persistence, resilience, and meaning. Love you, kiss you. That's my desire, my mission. That's my desire, my mission. Love you, kiss you. Love you, kiss you. Love you, kiss you. Love you, kiss you.
Hi, Carolyn. It's so nice to see you.
Great to see you, Shep. Thanks for having me here today.
My pleasure. So, as in all of these conversations, it starts with one question, and you're going to take us someplace, and I have no idea what it is. The question goes like this. In the same way that I was inspired by the Psalms to write this song, Kissing My Son, so that's inspired by Psalm 2, I'm hoping that it inspired some curiosities, questions, or comments from you, and I'd love to hear what some of those are.
Right. Well, when I went back and read the source text, I felt like that line about kissing the son was not necessarily the primary part of the, like it was all this other stuff. And then there was this little tidbit. And so I thought it was so cool that you latched onto that. And I see why, because that's what I would have latched onto as well. Because, it speaks to emotion and connection and relationship. And the other part of the text didn't quite as much. I guess I'm interested in what drew you to that particular part of it.
Wow. So look, I love that you latched on to the little thing that I latched onto.
Yeah.
I got into exploring Tehillim in two ways. Like you grow up going to a modern Orthodox yeshiva day school, and you say Tehillim, of course, in the context of prayer, Psukei de Zimra. You say it in the context of Hallel, another type of part of the prayer. You say it at the end of prayer. Like it's all over the place. But you focus on them being Tehillim when you do the communal prayer and you're reaching out to God and others in the community to say, hey, we're in crisis. Let's come together. So Tehillim has this beseeching quality to it. I then translated that into watching my dad say Tehillim every night before bed. And my dad, he was not like... He's not like as kind of logic-based as I am. I attribute that to my time at Rabbi Chait's Yeshiva, where it's all about logic. He was just like, okay, he was a check-the-box kind of Orthodox Jew. It was like, okay, my dad said Tehillim every night, so I'm going to say Tehillim every night. And he kind of mumbled through it, but nonetheless, he was deeply passionate about making sure he did it. The checking the box was the thing.
It was like a ritual. Yeah.
Yeah.
An important ritual to him. Yeah.
I don't think he had trouble sleeping. I do, but I don't think he did. So I don't think he needed it for that, but it was important to him to kind of complete the day with this process. So for me, when I approach each of these Tehillim, I'm coming at it from a very different place. I don't know that my father read them qua... Lama rugshu goyim, and said, why do the nations assemble? I don't think he broke it down in that way, but I love doing close readings of the texts. I look for the detail. And obviously there's nothing greater than looking at the relationship between relationships, husband and wife, parent and child. And this one obviously has that in spades in a few different places, although I only kind of focused on one of them.
I just found it curious that this piece that you wrote the song about was embedded in the midst of all this other stuff. Like, to me, it just felt like it didn't belong. Pay homage in good faith, kiss the son. And it's just this little parenthetical, lest God be angered and your way be doomed in the mere flash of God's anger. Happy are all who take refuge in God. I mean, wow, that is some intense stuff.
It's too intense.
Yeah, it's so angry. And I don't like this vein of Judaism that really centers on the chosenness aspect in connecting it to ruling over other nations. That doesn't really jive with my worldview too much.
Yeah, nor mine. Let's take a minute to talk about that.
Yeah, well, and I also want to say that I recognize that chosenness isn't all about dominance. It's about, God chose us and we chose God back. And that's how I think of that, whereas other peoples didn't necessarily. That's always been my thought around the chosenness idea. And
say more. So you're referring to a classic midrash. Rabbinic imagining.
I don't even know. But P.S., I grew up so Reform, in the deep South Reform, which is a totally different variety of Reform than Reform in other places. And this was in the 80s and 90s. So I don't know. I mean, I couldn't point to a midrash.
But you did. You just don't know it, but you did.
I've just been steeped in conservative Judaism since being with my spouse, who was a member of a conservative shul in Houston where we met. And so that was just kind of by default where I wound up, and then really fell in love with this congregation here in Denver and have learned so much from our mutual friend, Rabbi Rachel Kobrin. Anyway, just a little caveat there that my knowledge is minimal and surface level.
You know what? Your knowledge is your world experience. If, you can name it in a Jewish context, great. If you can't, also great. It doesn't really matter. To me, anyway. But so the midrash you're referring to is God offered the Torah
to other people, and they all said no, and then we said yes.
Well, but specifically, they said, well, what do you have to do?
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
this about? And the according to the Midrash, the Israelites said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then you'll tell us what we have to do. Right? So it's like this unconditional acceptance. Anyway, you were going somewhere before I distracted you with the focusing on chosenness.
Oh, I mean, I think I was just commenting on the aggression in this passage, this idea that we're supposed to be these sort of aggressive rulers over the nation, if I read that correctly. Let us break the cords of their yoke, shake their ropes from us. Okay, so that's like saying we want to be independent of the other nations. He who is enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord mocks at them. And this is where I start to see the connection between the human parent-child relationship.
Well, so say more about that.
Well, I think this is analogizing the relationship between God and the people Israel to like a human parent-child relationship.
The Tehillim explicitly says it in verse 7, you are my son. And by the way, the Hebrew is a gendered language, so it's my son.
Right.
It's my child, right? You are my child. I gave birth to you this day. And like, that's a powerful statement. God is not a human woman that can give birth. So that too is a metaphor.
Well, there are strains of, Judaism also has space for that and talks about, the male and female aspects of God.
God is not physical, at least in the Jewish tradition.
Right, correct.
So yeah. God could not have actually given birth.
Agree, yeah.
And so that right there says to us, all of this is metaphor. The Lord mocking them, what's the Hebrew in that? Yil'ag. Yoshev Bashamayim Yitzchak, God who is enthroned in heaven laughs, like Yitzchak, but Yitzchak typically means to play. Adonai Yil'ag Lamo, the Lord mocks at them. So, there's all sorts of wonderful stuff about God laughing, my favorite of which being God laughing when God's children surpass God. So in the same breath, you have God laughing and you have God...
not just laughing, but like mocking.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, there's laughter and then there's like mocking laughter.
Yeah, so. It's like a cynical God.
Yeah.
But I think that the substance of the cynicism, let us break the cords of their yoke, shake off their ropes from us. Like, what are the ropes? I mean, yes, in parts of Jewish history, Jews were enslaved. And presumably those are the kinds of yokes and ropes that the psalmist is referring to.
Well, do we know chronologically when was this written, after the time of bondage in Egypt or before?
Great question. So my understanding of the Psalms is that we don't always know who the author is. The traditional view is that the author was David, unless there's a specific reason to suggest that it might be someone else. So, for example, Tefillah Moshe, Psalm 90, presumably was written by Moshe. So we attribute this one to David, and the theory, again, traditional rabbinic thinking on this, as I understand it, is that the Psalms apply to the past. So you're right, that could be Egypt, the present. So the psalmist at that moment in time was thinking about breaking the cords of the yokes of the nation. Maybe it's going to the metaphor that's not a physical rope or yoke, but it's some other pressure coming in from the outside, the neighbors or people you disagree with who are impacting your behavior.
Sure.
Finally, it also applies to the future. That one's murkier to me because maybe it's a prediction of some sort. But if that's the case, is it, again, we still come to the same question. Is it literal or metaphorical?
Right.
And that's ultimately how I got my way into this particular song, in a way that both honors this very big national, international, philosophical, political spirit of the Tehillim, notwithstanding the fact that we are both put off by the anger, like that jealous God type of anger. But I looked at it from the smallest lens, and that is, what do you want for your child? Which is how you get into all the questions. The kissing my son, the title, and love you, kiss you, the kissing piece. It's a play on words. The Hebrew is nashku var, which the JPS translates as pay homage in good faith. Maybe that's the reference to kissing the ring, but it's a pun from the Radak.
What is a Radak?
All right, so we have layers of rabbinic writings. There's the Torah.
Right.
Then there's this, I referenced it before, the Midrash, which, as I understand it, is rabbinic dot connecting. Whether that's the dot connecting occurs because it's a tradition and it was given at Sinai, or it was the rabbis imagining. There's a whole debate about that. I like to think of it as rabbinic imagining, which may or may not have divine inspiration.
Midrashim are mostly like stories, right? That sort of fill in the gaps of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So on top of that, the next layer of rabbinic writing are the various commentators. And Radak, I think he's 12th century Europe.
Okay.
Do you want to read the Radak to us?
Sure. Kiss the son, as in the verse, and he kissed all his brethren.
Okay, so let's stop for a second. And he kissed all his brethren is a reference back to Joseph, I believe, right? I should have brought that source. So this is when Joseph comes back to his brothers.
After being
the same
sold.
Verb that's used. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And the word bar is the same as is that Bav?
Ben.
Ben. Sorry. My Hebrew is like that.
Okay.
And
you're doing great.
And so what, my son, B'nai? And what, O son, bar of my womb?
All right, so these are various uses of bar or ben.
Mm-hmm. Or it may be interpreted by the pure bri of heart.
Berry, purity.
Okay. If its meaning is son, this will be its interpretation. Kiss this son whom God has called son. As he says above, thou art my son, and the command is kiss, because it is the custom for a servant to kiss the hand of the master.
We can let go of the rest of it, but that's the piece that got me thinking about kissing my son. Like, in particular, it's the end of it, because it is the custom of a servant to kiss the hand of the master. The kiss in that context is not just love, but it's respect.
Right. Well, and so it's interesting that they're saying kiss the son. It's like flipping that custom on its head.
1,000%. That's what struck me so deeply.
It's like this reverence for your child, or in God's case, reverence for the people that chose God back, right? So,
look, in my theology, I think God has that reverence for
everyone.
You know, and God invites us to choose God back. But sometimes there's unrequited love there, and God still has, several billion people to engage with.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah.
But it's, for me, that's what led me to this whole smell of new life thing, because
that, to me, instantly, I thought of like new baby smell.
Yes.
Like when you sniff the top of their head and it's like.
Exactly. And that's what I had in mind.
Like, I want to bottle that smell. I can't believe it has been done. Some weirdo out there has probably like recreated that scent and sold it.
But for me, it's not that when you first hold your child, you say, I'm going to smell them. The smell envelops you. And for me, that's the closest that I get to feeling reverence. It's that smell. And that's what kind of really got me into all of this. And I was able to connect the dots because the Tehillim had so much other stuff in it related to that.
Smell is such a powerful sense. And I think it's like underrated a little bit, or maybe not, now that so many people have lost their sense of smell with COVID. I love how you've connected so many senses and emotions just in this one verse. Smell of new life, tremble, shaking. That's like a physical sensation, right? With joy, kissing my son. I mean, I can kind of feel that kiss of a baby's head, when I hear and read that line.
And you can hear it too.
Yeah, it's auditory. Fear in this joy. And that to me is like, it's like a fear in a positive sense, if that's possible. Like it's such an awesome, great depth of emotion that it's like a little scary.
Yeah.
Because maybe that's connected somewhat to like the fragility of life.
Yeah. The fragility of life qua living and the fragility of life, the experience.
All of it.
By the way, that comes from one of my favorite verses. So the English is serve the Lord in awe, tremble with fright. That's the rejoice in trembling. The Hebrew is ivdu es Hashem b'yira v'gilu bir'ada.
Yeah.
First of all, JPS translates yira as awe, but yira also means fear. And v'gilu bir'ada, rejoice in trembling. It's one of my favorite lines because it's a dialectic. It's a polarity because Gilu is rejoice and Re'ada is trembling or fear. And this Tehillim asks us to do both. This verse is the source. It's the source of why we break a glass at weddings.
Oh, yeah.
A rabbi broke a glass at a wedding. Why? Because the guests became too rowdy. They were having too much joy. It's like, have a lot of joy, but not too much, whatever too much is. And that's how the Gemara interprets this phrase. When you are thinking about the potential for a new life, you are thinking about all these wonderful things that could happen. And if you are oriented in the vein of worry, you're also thinking about all the things that might happen that aren't so good.
Oh my gosh, which is me. That's where I come from, always. My husband likes to joke that we got really into watching Game of Thrones together. Each house in Game of Thrones has its house words. And he goes, the house words of Carolyn are something bad is going to happen.
May I reveal your prior profession?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Like me, I am presently, and you were a lawyer. So
correct.
I think the nature of being a lawyer but the problem is
preparing for the worst and finding all the holes and yeah.
Right. By the way, I think that's why many of us choose this profession because our psychological makeup orients us that way, even if we don't know it at the time.
Sure. Yeah, and my dad, who is the same, I feel like I inherited this from my dad, and he was also a lawyer and is a retired bankruptcy judge. So
wow.
There you go.
So, but that's what brings us to verse 2.
Which is my favorite verse in this song. I'm just so interested to hear more about how you conceptualized this.
Okay, so this was a stream of consciousness.
So this was your first pass at the song?
Yeah.
Cool. I like to save all my drafts too. I see you changed if he isn't to what if he's not, which I think is great because it, matches the what if of all the other lines and cleans it up a little bit. We all have that wondering. I know certainly when I was pregnant with our daughter, just wondering, who is this person going to be? Who am I going to be as their parent? And that was much more the scary thought for me.
For me too.
What if I'm not, the best parent I can be? What if I'm not worthy of parenting this child?
What if they need discipline and you give them compassion? What if they need compassion and you give them discipline?
Or just kind of this general overarching worry of like, what if I can't give them what they need?
Exactly.
Whatever that may be. What if we disagree on everything? What if, their interests are very different from mine, which is actually in some ways the case with my child. And it's great. I love it because I'm learning, like she's super into fashion right now. And she's 9.5. She'll be turning 10 in May. I have never been into fashion and she loves it. And she draws clothing designs and took a fashion illustration class and like after school and just gets really into it. And I love how she sees it. It's an art form and she sees it like that and sees it as a way of expressing herself or helping other people express themselves in clothing. And it's just something that I never thought I would gain an appreciation for, but through her, I kind of have.
Do you take her shopping with you now?
Well, okay. So no, the way my child acquires clothing mostly is my mother. This is my parents' only grandchild and she will be their only grandchild. And my mother loves to shop. My mother also loves clothes. And so she will step into a store like that sells children's clothes and buy all the things and then send them to Sarah. So if I happen to see something, I'm not a big shopper.
If you need to go shopping for yourself, whether it's for a bar mitzvah, a wedding, or a photo shoot for your next album, would you take Sarah with you?
I haven't, but I think now I would. Now that she's older and isn't going to be a maniac in the store. So
I don't think that I nailed it on this line. Shake off the ropes of convention, dive deep, dive in, divine laughter ringing.
Oh, I like how you change this to the ropes of convention. That can mean so, and when you know what the source text is, if you interpret that source text as being about not shaking off other people's trying to control how we live, right? Or trying to force us to conform. So I like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's exactly what I was going for.
Be yourself. But it's also in a personal sense, in a more relational sense. It's I read that as a parent telling a child to be yourself. Don't worry about what other people say you need to be. You do you.
That's exactly right. And by the way, if we allow for the flipping on the head of where the respect goes from parents to child, it's also the child telling the parent, shake off the ropes of convention.
Okay.
And that's what brings you back to the divine laughter ringing thing. That's just a reference to that, you make God laugh, not a laugh of mockery, but the laugh of joy. Nitzchuni banai, you've surpassed me, my children.
Yeah, I did not read that as, I wondered if it was the mocking laughing, just because that is referenced in the text. But initially my thought was, that's not it's God taking pride and joy in our being ourselves. Yeah. Right. Because that's why, we're put on this earth to be who we are, not to be who others say we should be. And so I think that when we live our purpose and sort of find and lean into who we're supposed to be, that brings God joy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Again, I love the stories in the Midrashim, the Zushya story.
I don't know if I'm familiar with that.
I'm sure I'm going to mess it up, but it's something like there was a very kind of pious chassid named Zushya, and he gave tzedakah, he helped people, and, he learned Torah. He was, one of the righteous ones. And he goes up to the heavens at the end of his life. He's terrified. And they ask him at the pearly gates, why are you so scared? You were completely righteous. You did all these wonderful things. And Zushya responds, I'm terrified because I wasn't as brilliant as Moshe or Avraham or, David or whoever. And they say, the angels or God says, don't worry, I only want you to be the best Zushya you can be.
Yeah. And I feel like there are versions of this in most world religions, because I distinctly remember, this is a little bit tangential, but I majored in religious studies in college. So despite my somewhat shallow knowledge compared to others about Judaism in particular, I took a comparative sort of approach to studying religion when I was a college student. And I took this class on Buddhism with this amazing professor, Dr. Anne Klein. And she was talking about how the Buddhists believe that the way to sort of be reincarnated to a higher life form is to be the best you can be in your current life. So if you're Jewish, you be the best Jew you can be, and then you'll be reincarnated, as, something else.
Yeah. For me, with both the song and the psalm, I think that there's in the song, it's explicit. In the psalm, it's implicit. You got to stick with it. And, if you read the ropes as the ropes of convention, God is telling you, don't be influenced by other people here. God is only mocking when you just kind of acquire the alien thought and make it your own rather than challenging it. Now, that is not a classical read of this particular Tehillim. This is my reinterpretation of it. but it aligns with how I got to where I got to in the song.
Interesting. I'm just thinking through how that concept relates to how Jews the world over have assimilated, and it's a fine line to toe, right? Like I think it's fair to say that you and I are relatively assimilated people into American culture, and I think that's a good thing. And that's not passing judgment on people who are less assimilated, but it makes you wonder, like, is this passage saying you shouldn't do that? But, maybe if we do it in a conscientious way where we're thinking through, like, what aspects of the dominant culture do I want to try out or take on, and what aspects do I want to reject? Maybe that's the way to go.
So you've hit on kind of like a core life philosophy for me. I grew up modern Orthodox. I don't identify that way anymore, though I have deep connections to it and a lot of practices that I retain from it. I currently identify as a limud Jew, which basically means don't put a label on it, just be a serious Jewish person, also known as cross-communal or post-denominational, whatever you want to call it. But for me, when you grow up modern Orthodox, you grow up with the concepts of Torah umada, which means Torah is an important value. It's something to study. It's something to live your life by. But you also need other knowledge. You also need work. You have to have a career and be in the world. To me, it gets encapsulated back in that same verse. We're back in verse 11. Tremble with fright, rejoice in trembling. For me, the idea of Gilu Bir'ada and Torah Umada, taking these polarities and managing them, that's what it's all about. I mean, the Rambam, the Maimonides, a 12th century scholar, or 13th century, he was a massive Aristotelian, so he talks about the golden mean. I was deeply influenced by the Rambam because the yeshiva I studied at after my kind of gap year in Israel was highly Maimonidean. Therefore, it was highly Aristotelian. So for me, it's about finding that balance. And, when I had the opportunity to study with Barry Johnson in 2001, he gave me a language for it that I had previously been unaware of. He does this thing called polarity management. You have to have fear and you have to have joy, if those are the two polarities. You have to have Torah, Jewish or not, whether you view it as divine or not, but the wisdom that's in the Torah, and you have to be in the world and engage.
Right, because we're a light unto the nations, right? And so if you're not engaging, you can't share that light.
That's exactly where I was going. I was going to bring us back to the chosenness conversation. To me, chosenness doesn't mean God said, oh my God, you Jews, you're so awesome. Chosenness means,
I love you the most. You're my favorite child.
Yeah. Okay. And if that means you're the ones with the responsibility to get these concepts across to other people, break off the yoke of convention, explore relationships of meaning, I think that is what God wants of people who are Israelites. And that doesn't necessarily mean Jews. Because Israelite, and to the extent that I ever do post all of these conversations, people will hear some things over and over, and this is one of them. Israelite means Yisrael, which means to struggle with God.
With God. Yep. That was by the way, Jacob becomes Israel was my Torah portion for my bat mitzvah.
Oh, nice.
It's like my favorite.
It's a beautiful one.
Yeah. I got very lucky with that Torah portion. It's so juicy and good. But yeah, I think that's a really cool way to look at it. I was also thinking as you were talking about how even though we are supposed to share this wisdom and all of that, it's interesting that we are at the same time not a proselytizing people.
Right. That's an accident of history.
Okay.
So we were a proselytizing religion until, I forget if it was the Babylonians or the Romans. I think it was the Romans. Basically said, we've conquered you, thou shalt not proselytize. That may or may not have, my instinct is that this probably, the non-proselytizing happened once Christianity became the dominant religion in Rome. So it takes, it's a few hundred years after the destruction, but we were proselytizing until then.
Not only are we not proselytizing people, it is extraordinarily hard to become a Jew. It's not like a simple thing. It's not like you just say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. No, you have to go through years of work, and you have to really want it, and you have to knock on the rabbi's door 3 times to show you really want it. And, it's interesting.
And by the way, we can have a whole conversation about why and whether we should be having all of those doors and gates that block entry. There's an organization that advocates getting rid of all of these barriers to entry and saying, you want to become Jewish? Okay, you just need to kind of have a serious Jew. There are observant Jews, there are not observant Jews. But here's access to the wisdom of our tradition. Here you go. Have at it. Now you're part of the chain of transmission too. I think the organization's name was Big Tent Judaism, and it was run by Rabbi Kerry Olitsky.
That's interesting. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. I have very mixed feelings about that.
Why?
But I feel I don't know. I just feel protective of our traditions and our ways of life. And, anyway, that's, like you said, it's kind of a separate conversation.
Yeah, but it's a good conversation to have, I personally feel like we don't need as many barriers.
Yeah, I see that too. And I think about how children of interfaith parents, like where the mother's not Jewish, and then they get turned away by certain movements, including the conservative movement, which I'm now a part of. Like, I think that's wrong. I think that's antiquated stuff around, like back in ancient times, not being able to be sure who the father was. And so that's my understanding of how we have matrilineal.
Me too. I mean, there's some great Talmud around this. Yeah. And in a world where we are such a small minority and we are experiencing attrition in most of the community, not the Haredi community, that's exploding in terms of numbers, but most other communities, they're not expanding exponentially. And I think that's Rabbi Olitsky's perspective. This is why he's like, if people want in, let them in. Just give them the tools and the opportunities to explore Torah, ritual, the holiday cycle, and communities, create a shul shopping concierge. Okay, what are your values? Are you are you a social justice person? Or, okay, well, there's this gun-toting rabbi in LA. If you're into guns, we can connect you, and so on and so forth, whatever your thing is.
Does the fear of God's wrath inspire you? Like, I had an instant no. Does not. I don't make a single decision in my life ever worrying about what God's going to think, and that may be because I'm a little bit agnostic, but which I know is like a weird, it's not unusual, I think, for a Jewish person to also be agnostic, but
there are Jewish people who are atheists.
Right. But
in fact, this is the first conversation we ever had. Do you remember this?
Was it? I don't remember.
We were at the the first Amy Speece session at Song School.
Oh, and that guy came up and
Gary
played a song.
Weinberg.
Yeah.
Lord.
And to me, felt so Jewish. It was something about like footsteps and
yeah. So I've since had the opportunity to connect with Gary, and we are co-writing something.
Oh, interesting.
Gary grew up Jewish and kind of left it all behind at his bar mitzvah. And, he found what I think he's called the New Thought movement, which is, and it's definitely more complicated than this, but I think God dwells in each of us and love each other unconditionally and more.
Okay.
He had written this very religious song, and you and a few other people were like, well, I don't know that I can kind of relate to this particular God as he was expressing it.
Something about it. I remember there was something about it that felt Christian to me. And I was confused because he had like a stereotypically Jewish sounding name. And yeah. So I was like, who is this guy? What is this deal?
He's a very interesting cat. But so for what it's worth, the fear of God's wrath, I think the answer is, it doesn't inspire me.
No, it doesn't. And for me, it doesn't come into play at all. I just don't care. Like, I'm totally indifferent. He can get God, sorry to use the gendered he, but that's how I grew up. But God can get as angry as they want and, whatever.
I think it ties back to the conversation we were having a little while ago, which is if God's anger helps you become your best you, then use that inspiration. Mm-hmm. So God as tool, not God as enforcer. Okay. And I think that's part of the God wrestling. What do you think God is? What's God's role in your life? Mm-hmm. And if you're someone who's, we were talking before about the problem is, right, there are people who organize their thinking on the lo ta'aseh, the thou shalt nots. Mm-hmm. There are certain things that's critical for me. There are other things where it's not. And I think that goes to the issue of there are 613 written commandments in the Torah and something like 16,000 when you kind of take them all down in detail, like with in the halachic system. Yeah. You have to find your mitzvah or your mitzvot, right. your mitzvahs. And whether they are the aseh, as in I'm going to pray, aseh means the thou shalts, or mm-hmm. the lo ta'aseh, the thou shalt nots, as in I'm not going to eat treif, food that's not kosher, or something as simple as I'm not going to covet my neighbor's wife or murder or kidnap, If that's your expression of a godly relationship, the consequence of which would be God's anger, and therefore it helps you kind of stay in the zone, that works for me. Yeah, yeah. Like, I don't get there personally. Like, it just says lo ta'aseh. I don't worry about God's anger per se. Mm-hmm. For me, I worry about to what extent am I participating in making God's world, because I'm not agnostic in that sense. I'm agnostic about what it is that God does, but I do believe that there is a God, and that's God is a force in the universe, and that God wants something of us. I just want to say I like that interpretation of God. Like, that speaks to me. It's good. I'm not sure what God does, but belief that a God exists and has some sort of effect on things. Yeah. And that's where it gets really crazy. Because, do you believe in hashgacha pratis? Private protection is like God, your own security force. God's in the room with us now and saying, Shep, don't say that. Say this. Like, is that the kind of controlling God you believe in? Or do you believe that God is kind of listening in and saying, I hope he doesn't say that? Yeah, I think it's a little more of a hands-off kind of thing to me, where, we were given free will, right? So if you believe in, creationist sort of ideas, like, if you believe that God created humans, and I don't know if I believe that necessarily, but I do know that we have free will, that I don't think that there's some greater force sort of steering me like a car, Yeah. I do think, I don't know. I think that we are imbued with certain notions around purpose and maybe there's God in that. Well, so I'm curious about your creative process. Is your creative process head-oriented or is it heart-oriented or both? It's both. It's both. And sometimes it's more, leans more one direction than the other. I've heard those songs that feel very heady and cerebral. And I'm like,
Like it doesn't speak to me. I need more. I need more. Like feed my emotion, feed my heart. So I strive to infuse my work with both. I don't know if I'm always successful. I think I wrote more emotionally when I was like a teenager and young adult. Maybe hormones had a role in that. I don't know. But now I think I do incorporate more of my mind than maybe I did before, because I try to tell stories that go beyond my own personal experience. Mm-hmm. Like the song that's on my record called Across the Borderline is, I've never experienced what the character in this song is going through. It's about an immigrant who's, arrives at our southern border and gets separated from her children. But I felt such deep empathy for these stories that we were hearing that the song just came out, and it felt... There are times, I know you've experienced this, there are times when you write a song and it feels like you're channeling something beyond you. And that was one of those songs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Jewish connection. But so Rabbi Abraham Heschel marched with Dr. King in Selma. And the story goes, if I'm getting this right, the story goes that some very observant rabbis were giving him a hard time and saying, because he was there, I guess, during Shabbat. And they said, did you pray while you were down there in Selma? Sort of hassling him and giving him a hard time. And he said, yes, I prayed with my feet. And I just get chills, even though I've heard it a million times, I still get chills thinking about that. And that it is so powerful. And I think just encapsulates so much of what Judaism teaches us. But so that concept found its way into my song.
But from your head, or did it just come?
The song was originally inspired when I was preparing. This was around Yom Kippur, and I had been asked to help lead the music for a children's service. And I was looking at the machzor, the children's machzor, and there were these watercolor images. And when you get to Micha Mocha, there's a watercolor image of the Jews crossing the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, as I'm looking at this picture of Jews in the desert, and I at the time, the headlines around family separations happening at our border with Mexico were dominating the headlines. And I thought to myself, times haven't changed that much. Mm. So that was where the song started. That was the seed of the song. And the song is, this woman crossing the desert with her two daughters. And then I finished it after hearing Rabbi Rachel Kobrin's sermon. And this was the first year she had just been hired as our new rabbi. And so this was her first Yom Kippur sermon with our congregation. And I will never forget it. It was so powerful. And she was so passionate in her delivery and the message. And, she was condemning this policy of family separation. And she was condemning racism in our country. And she was condemning homophobia. It covered a lot of ground successfully. But she referenced this Heschel line about praying with your feet. And I was like,
there you go.
That's where the rest of the song has to go. And so it helped me come home and, yes, I played my guitar in Yom Kippur or whatever. But I came home and finished the song,
This goes to the whole question about what do I think God is. I don't think God is controlling what I say, but I think God is offering us a menu. And when we write poetry, scripts, when we design clothes like Sarah does, when we write lyrics, if you can do fine art like my friend Liat, you are tapping into this godliness and doing your best to interpret it. And sometimes you need your heart and your head gets in the way, and sometimes your head really helps you. But at the end of the day, if it's all head, it's going to feel like it's all head, unless you're kind of into math rock, and some of that stuff is amazing, but it's typically instrumental, so it has a whole other vibe to it. By and large, you want to write something that has head and heart in it, as you said, because that's what's going to get God on the page, as it were.
But what a gift you're giving to your kids. I think that's so amazing. I mean, that will just And that will live on. You know, that's why we record and share songs and art and whatever, because, you know, it stays after we've left. And I think that's so cool.
Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Carolyn Shulman for giving me her time, wisdom, and talent, to Emil Stern and E. Rose for their help in producing this episode, and to Jessica Hanna Swedler for her help on social media. Please post your comments, like, and subscribe, but most important, I hope our conversation inspired you in some way. In the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, please join me and my guest, friend, and mentor, the incredible Dr. Mayim Bialik. Inspired by the song Shooting Yourself in the Heart by Liz Hanlon and me, which itself was inspired by Psalm 37, we discuss the difference between poetry and music, Falling Down, King David's Naughtiness, some of our favorite 80s bands, the songwriting process, intertextuality, the inextricable binding between Torah study and music, and we start to write a song. And there's so much more. Meanwhile, I've included Carolyn's song that we discussed, Across the Borderline, so you can have a sense of what that's all about.
You woke up early before the sun rose. You packed some water and some worn out clothes. You got your girls up, whispered it's time to go. Took one last look before the door closed. You don't know what lies ahead, only what you leave behind. And you're searching for salvation across the borderline. Every footstep is a prayer. You beg safe passage till you're there. You hope God will give you refuge across the borderline. The desert miles are long, your muscles ache. Your belly's empty, how much more can you take? The sun keeps beating down, your girls are crying now. The water's low and time is running out. You don't know what lies ahead, only what you left behind. And you're yearning for salvation across the borderline. Every footstep is a prayer. You beg safe passage till you're there. You can rest inside that refuge across the borderline. What could you do when the one who said he'd care for you sold out your trust for a quick fix and a buck or two? He led the wolves right to your door. You were not safe there anymore. No. When you arrived, you thought God heard your prayers until a guard barked, you go here, those girls go there. Before you knew what had gone wrong, he had ripped them from your arms. Now they're frightened and alone somewhere. And you don't know what lies ahead, only what you left behind. Now you're yearning for your children across the borderline. And every phone call is a prayer. You beg them, hold on till you're there. You ask God to reunite you. Oh, you thought God would give you refuge. God, please grant them strength and refuge. Oh, God, forgive us for these sins across the borderline.